Good morning, everybody. I'm in a different spot. Can you tell? I am actually in my one of my granddaughter's bedrooms. I'm in Austin, Texas. We're actually Georgetown, Texas, just north of Austin, and this is where my daughter, the phone call daughter, the one that I tell that story about, lives. But my other kids are coming in today, so we're going to have a few days with all my kids and all my grandkids. So it's going to be awesome. And if I look a little tired, it's just because we're an hour off and this is earlier than I'm used to, but no big deal. All right. Last week we talked about assigning motives to people. You know, when people do things, we kind of tell ourselves why they did it. And that's a form of judgment, but it's also a form of efficiency, you might say. Your brain likes to, because there's so many different experiences you have had and are going to have, your brain puts things in categories. You know, this kind of person, this kind of a moment tends to go this way, and we just kind of put things in categories, or you might call it labeling. We label things, and kind of like assigning a motive or judging. When you label something, it affects the way you see it. It affects the way you experience it, even. Have you ever met someone and you responded very negatively to them? Maybe you did your best for it not to show, but internally you responded negatively to them. And their behavior, the energy they gave off, just the way they talk to people or about people, just something about them was a bit of a turnoff to you. And you know, in a sense, you judge them, you categorize them, or you label them. You know, this is an angry person. This is an arrogant person. This is a lazy person. This is and some of it goes on below the conscious line. And by the way, we might talk about that next week, subliminal thinking, and we'll see. We might talk about that next week. But so you've reacted to this person. Your brain is, in its effort to conserve energy, kind of says, okay, this person is this, and you label them, and you know it puts kind of like a handle. And you can kind of carry it around, and you know, anytime you see that person or someone like that person, you kind of know how to react to them, how to respond to them, how to treat them, maybe how to avoid them. It just depends. So labeling is another form. You know, the fancy word for it might be prejudice, prejudge. Prejudge simply means that you judge someone before you have sufficient information. Prejudge means you judge someone before you've really gotten to know them and that kind of thing. So here's a thought for you. Have you ever met someone, responded negatively to them, and maybe that went on for days, weeks, months, who knows, could even be years. And then at some point you heard their story. You know, you heard a friend say, oh, wasn't it terrible, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, wait a minute, are you talking about so-and-so? And they're talking about the person that you've assigned a label to. And you've categorized, you've assigned motive, and in a sense, you've judged them. And listen, guys, it's not always wrong. It's how we survive. It's what we teach our kids. We, you know, don't talk to strangers. Well, a stranger is a label. A stranger is a judgment. In a sense, it's assigning a motive. And again, I'm not saying this is wrong. It's the best thing to do in a culture that's potentially dangerous, and that is we categorize them, right? So it's not always wrong. That's not my point. So later you hear a friend talking about this person that you've labeled, and you catch and you say, "Wait a minute, are you talking about them?" And they, yeah. You didn't know, and next thing you know, you hear their story. And it explains Remember, excuse and explain are not the same thing. In fact, maybe we need to talk about that sometime. Excusing someone's behavior is very different from explaining someone's behavior. Explaining someone's behavior gives actually everything we're talking about. It gets behind the what and the how to the why. It gets behind what they do and how they do it to why they do it. And again, remember, explaining behavior is very different from excusing behavior. So you hear their story and it's like, oh my gosh, how they act in that situation we were in makes sense now. And I drew this conclusion and it was the wrong conclusion. It was an unfair judgment, assessment, if you will, of them. Now, here's the other thing remember, we're still talking about toxins. We're talking about things that in and of themselves, in small little amounts, are not that big a deal. But as they build up in your system, they cause weakness, they cause inefficiency. In other words, they make your system just not work well. And they cause discomfort, pain. So what we're talking about today is this whole idea of labeling. And labeling is again, it's your brain's desire, to be efficient, if you will, conserve energy, and protect you. And it's quick to assign labels, quick to assign the person or thing to a category, and then you associate that person with everybody else in that category. So a couple of quick things about labels. When you label something, you don't see it for what it is anymore. Once you put a label on something, you see everything in light of the label. You might say it this way. We've talked about this a good while back, I think. Labeling produces what we call selective attention. Selective attention is when you see what you're looking for. You know, we teasingly talk about how spouses have selective hearing. You know, they only hear what they want to hear. Well, once you've labeled someone, you see what you want to see. There's another thing that we call confirmation bias. Confirmation bias means once I've decided what something is or why someone does what they do, once I've made that assessment, then I see all the data, the evidence that supports or confirms my opinion. So it could be an individual, could be an entire group of individuals. And we form these labels, and then we fall into what we call confirmation bias or selective attention, where we only see the parts that agree with what we've already decided is true. Again, what we're talking about is toxins that get in our soul and disrupt the way our soul operates, our mind operates. And we do the same thing with ourselves, by the way. We label ourselves. And when we label ourselves a certain way, we see things and gather evidence to support the label. I've told you many, many times, you're lazy, you'll never amount to anything. My father would say, well, I gathered evidence to support that. And I no longer believe that, because now I'm able to see all the other things about myself that don't agree with that label. And that's what I want for you. And I want you to learn to do that. Love your neighbor as yourself. I want you to learn to do that with yourself. But I also want you to learn to do that with the people around you, where you're able to assign a freedom to them. You give them the freedom to be unique. And you stay curious and want to learn more about them. All right? Love you guys. And I will catch you next week. Bye.